Ruger, sit. So right there, he's not paying attention. He gave me a sit. First time I'm working with him, so I'm not gonna be super, super hard on him. He did sit, wasn't as fast as I wanted it to be, but he'll get there. Stay. You can either do an implied sit, which is without the stay, or what most people do is they do the stay.
All right, guys, let's get into technicalities here about stuff. You don't need, first off, an implied sit would not mean implied stay. Implied sit would mean like an auto sit. So we imply that when we go up to the door, the dog should just sit on their own.
Yeah.
Right? Which, in my opinion, is unnecessary, right? Like that's, you know, frankly, like half the time when we're working doorway manners, I always say we don't even use a sit before we open it. We simply teach the dog to not go through the doorway, right? If our goal is to micromanage our dogs as little as possible, but we're constantly needing to tell them sit or else they'll rush through the doorway, we're never accomplishing what it is we actually want. Now, stay irrelevant, guys. This is something that, listen, when I first started getting into training and stuff like that, it's common knowledge, right? As a trainer, you're like, we have to teach stay, we have to teach stay, we have to teach stay, right? But stay is the most redundant word in the dog training language.
Yeah.
There's never a time you're going to tell your dog to sit, but get up whenever you want to, right? Let's say he did not say stay there, right? And you open that door and the dog got up. Why would opening the door be a permission granting thing for the dog to get out of that sit? It just doesn't make sense.
No.
So if you look at your commands, right, everything we ask our dog to do just has to have a clear beginning and a clear end, right? So the beginning is the command itself. The end is the release.
Yeah.
That's it. No need to overcomplicate it. There's not multiple ways you need to do doorways or anything like that. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Holding, building duration. Good. So this is important for you guys to understand. As soon as the dog says, okay, time's up, I'm over it, you have to split between, is this fair for the dog or is this not? In his case, he's a pretty smart dog. He's been working for a...
And again, we're creating more complications to this, right? There's no, like, if you put your dog in a sit and they broke that sit, right? There is not a, is it fair or is it not fair? I don't care how you discipline the dog to get the dog back in, but you do have to fix the dog and put them back into that sit position, right? And our rule of thumb is as little pressure as we can get away with, but as much as we need to. So I think what he's implying is like, determine if you need to give a really big correction or a really minor correction, right? But that is not contingent on what's going on around the dog. Actually, it is contingent on what's going on around the dog, but the dog determines it, right? If the dog is really distraction, correction needs to be higher. If the dog is pretty focused in and you just need to make a little adjustment and use minimal pressure, that's sufficient enough.
Okay.
A little bit with the other trainers. He knows sit. So when he gets back up, it's important for you to immediately, there, good, sit. Good sit. So you have to put immediate pressure on him and correct him for that behavior. That's the difference between your dog sustainably listening to the behaviors you ask the dog to do versus not. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break him here. Ruger, break, good job. He's on his break right now, so he's being a dog. And this is important for you guys too, is you have to give your dog a break. You have to have a verbal cue, just like you have a verbal cue to work. You have to have a verbal cue to say, hey.
There's just too much talking going on right now, right? I thought we were working doorways. Like, what do we, you know, why do I need to give my dog a break after I worked one doorway with them? You know what I mean? Like, you could release them from that sit, but they don't need a break after it. We just need to work the doorways. One other thing here, and this is not just a Tom thing, this is something I see in a lot of dog training videos, right? You need to understand when you're using aversives with a dog, exactly how you're implementing those aversives. So let's go back. Let's look at that example again here, right, that he brought up. So he's got the dog in a sit, right?
He's a pretty smart dog. He's been working for a little bit with the other trainers. He knows sit.
Right.
So when he gets back...
So he broke the sit the first time. Let's look at this. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Or what most people do is they do the stay. Holding, building duration.
Dog breaks the sit. He used an first to interrupt the dog with a singular leash pop.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is important for you guys to understand.
Second
as soon
time
as
he
the
did
dog
this.
says, okay, time's up, I'm over it, you have to split between, is this fair for the dog or is this not? In his case, he's a pretty smart dog. He's been working for a little bit with the other trainers. He knows sit. So when he gets back up, it's important for you to immediately, there, good. Sit.
That time he said good, And then he gave multiple leash pops, right? So here's the thing, and this is what he's implying with this. He's just not doing a very good job of articulating it correctly. You have to ask yourself, is your dog in the training stage of things, or are they in the proofing stage of things? That's what he means about, is it fair? Is it not fair, right?
Yeah.
In the training stages of things, if we're using an aversive in the training stage of things, technically we would want to use a reinforcement. We would use negative reinforcement, which means we would be applying steady pressure and we would be releasing pressure when the dog gets into the position,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Because that would be eliciting more of a positive response in association with the sit, right? So we're increasing the likelihood of the dog getting into the sit position. So our leash pressure would turn on and it would turn off, but it would turn off when they sit, not on like a pop, right? If we're in the proofing stages of things, say we're working sits and we know he knows what sit is, we've taught sit, and we're just going to correct for not sitting, we have to have a clear and consistent mark to identify the mistake, because it's less about reinforcing the dog getting into a sit, and it's more about decreasing the dog blowing us off and not being in the sit. So using sometimes, no other times, I think he just probably accidentally said good there, obviously, because he might have been distracted by the camera, which is okay, whatever. We all make mistakes. We have to have a clear mark, though, to identify that mistake. And then we have to give one clear correction that is motivating enough to the dog. Watch this right here. So, little pop.
Good sit.
Ultimately got him back into the sit, but it was a sloppy way of disciplining the sit, right? There was no consistency amongst the first time and amongst the second time, right? So you start getting into these, let's call them dogmen. There was a term going around for a while. I believe Chad Mackin, who's another trainer, I'm sure we'll talk about at some point on the podcast here, kind of coined for a little bit, which is like dogsmanship, which is just this like, we're using intuition and we're going off the dog and like we're adjusting what we're doing so fluidly with the dog and stuff like that. But it's confusing as fuck, and it gets into this concept like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast when I was talking about like Michael Ellis and I was talking about Ivan Balabanov,
Blabalov.
whatever it was. Where dog training, right? There is some intuition that goes into it, and there is some reading the dog that goes into it. But the things we're doing have to fit into clear scientific realms of communication, right? And if we're altering what we're doing so much on this basis of like, well, it just depends. Sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's this way. Other times, if the dog's unfair about this, it's this way, and blah, blah, blah. It becomes really confusing for everybody. And we start to create this association of nobody can follow along with what you're doing and have a clear black and white if A equals B, or A plus B equals C or whatever. You know what I mean? Where, we talked about, we broke down like the training guide. We have our trainers. There's adjustments that get made from time to time for sure, but there is a black and white. We are using negative reinforcement to enforce this because of this. We are using positive punishment to decrease this because of this. We are using positive reinforcement in this case because this is this. You know what I mean? Like there's black and white parameters around things where there's not you have to kind of guess between the two mentality. You know what I mean? And here's the thing. He's still going to accomplish the same thing. He's still going to get the dog to sit at the doorway, right? But if you're understanding the science behind what you're doing better, you could do it more effectively and more efficiently.